Hi, my name's Evelyn Harper, and I'm 72 years old. I've always been a quiet woman, the kind who blends into the background, who smiles politely even when my heart is screaming, "This isn't fair." But today, I'm done blending in. Today, I need to tell you exactly what happened when they took my chair and said, "You don't need it." It started innocently enough, or at least I thought it did. I've been living in the same little apartment for the last 20 years. Nothing fancy, just me, my memories, and the creaky old chair by the window where I drink my morning coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. That chair has seen my tears, my laughter, my heartbreaks, and my quiet victories. It's not just furniture. It's a piece of me. The morning they took it was cold, the kind of December chill that sneaks through the window panes even with the heater cranked to full. I shuffled to the kitchen, sleepy-eyed, and poured myself a cup of coffee. The smell was comforting, grounding. I turned back to the living room, ready to settle into my chair, and that's when I saw it. The chair was gone. My chair. Gone. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe I'd moved it and forgotten. But no, the space was empty, like it had never existed. And sitting smugly in its place was a brand new, modern recliner, sleek, cold, and completely foreign. "Oh," I said, trying to sound casual. "That's new." From the doorway, my daughter-in-law, Jessica, smiled, too wide, too perfect. She had that look people get when they're about to deliver bad news disguised as kindness. "Mom, we got rid of your old chair," she said lightly. "You don't need it anymore. This one's much better for you." My chest tightened. My voice faltered. I don't understand. I loved that chair. It's mine." She shrugged, like it was nothing. "You don't need it, Evelyn. You have this one now. Trust me, it's more comfortable. You'll like it." Comfortable? That word bounced around my head like a cruel joke. The chair wasn't about comfort. It was about history. It was about my life, the life I had fought to keep together. But they didn't see it. None of them ever did. I tried to sit in the new chair. It was stiff, too high, too wrong. Every time I sank into it, I felt a little hollow inside, like they had replaced a part of me I couldn't get back. I wanted to scream, but what good would that do? My son, Michael, barely glanced up from his phone. He had always been so quick to side with Jessica. My own blood, and he didn't see the weight of what they'd done for weeks. I avoided the chair. I spent my mornings standing by the window, holding my coffee in my hands, staring at the empty space where my chair used to be. The apartment felt smaller, colder. I watched people pass on the street, feeling invisible, unimportant. And I realized this wasn't just about a chair. It was about control. About them deciding what I should want, what I should feel, what I should value. Then, one evening, something inside me snapped. I was sitting in the kitchen, the sun setting orange over the rooftops, and I remembered every time I'd stayed silent. Every time I'd let people steamroll over me for the sake of peace. Every time I'd smiled while my heart was breaking. I'd been small for too long. I started making a plan. Subtle, careful, perfect. I wasn't going to yell, or cry, or beg. No. I would remind them, in a way they'd never forget, that I was still here. I had value. I had power. And I had memory. The first step was simple. I started documenting everything. The chair, the morning it disappeared, their faces, their words. I took pictures, wrote notes, kept a small diary of every emotion, every glance, every sigh. I researched, quietly, how to reclaim what had been stolen, not legally, not through confrontation, but with patience and precision. And then came the night I waited for them. I waited until Jessica and Michael left for the city dinner party, laughing like they owned the world, and I moved. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I simply walked into the empty living room, opened the closet where I'd hidden my chair for weeks, and brought it back into the light. The familiar fabric, worn arms, the small tear near the cushion where my cat used to scratch, it all came rushing back. I placed it exactly where it had always been. I sat down, letting the weight of history press against me, and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a forgiving smile, but the smile of someone who remembered her worth. I didn't need anyone else to validate it. I had taken back what was mine. When they returned, Jessica gasped, and Michael froze. Their eyes darted between the chair and me, confused, angry, and just maybe afraid. "Mom," Jessica said, voice tight. Where did that come from?" I leaned back, arms resting on the familiar curves, and said, softly, deliberately, "I got it back. Because some things, you don't just take from people. And some people, they need to be reminded that respect isn't optional." That night, I slept in my chair, feeling taller, stronger, alive in a way I hadn't in years. I realized something crucial. It wasn't about the chair. It was about me. My voice. My choices. And from that day forward, I swore I would never again let anyone decide my worth. I woke up the next morning feeling a strange mix of triumph and unease. Triumph, because my chair, was back where it belonged. Unease, because I knew Jessica and Michael would be plotting something in response. I wasn't naive. I knew they didn't just let things slide. Control was their religion, and I was the heretic. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I wrapped my hands around my mug and sat in my chair, staring out the window at the frost forming on the sidewalks. Every morning had started this way for decades, peaceful, reflective, yet unremarkable. Now, even a small victory felt like a revolution. By mid-morning, I heard the faint clatter of keys in the lock. My heart tightened. Jessica and Michael were home. I braced myself, trying to appear calm, but inside, every nerve was alert. Jessica came in first, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome of accusation. "Mom," she said, voice too sweet, too controlled, about the chair. I didn't flinch. I only sipped my coffee, slow and deliberate. I don't know why you'd take it back. We bought you a chair that's better for your back. You should be grateful." Her eyes narrowed, scanning my face for any sign of weakness. I placed my cup down, letting it thud softly against the saucer. "Better for my back?" I echoed, voice gentle but firm. "Jessica, comfort isn't the same as belonging. You think a chair is just something to sit on. But this," I gestured vaguely, letting my hand hover above the fabric, "this is a piece of my life. And you don't get to decide which pieces I keep." Michael appeared behind her, phone still in hand. "Mom, come on," he said, trying to sound reasonable, but his eyes betrayed irritation. "It's just a chair. You're making a big deal over nothing." "Nothing?" I laughed softly, a sound that made the room feel colder somehow. "Michael, you've always been quick to minimize everything I feel. Always. Do you think this chair is just a chair? It's history, it's comfort, it's memory. And most of all, it's mine. I didn't ask for permission to reclaim what's mine. I simply did it." Jessica's face reddened, and she stepped closer, as if proximity could intimidate me. "Mom, you're making a scene. You can't just defy us like this." I leaned back, letting the chair support me fully, feeling its familiar contours press against me. "Oh, I can. And I will. I've spent my whole life making sure everyone else's voice mattered more than mine. That ends now." I knew I had to be careful. Open confrontation would be messy. So I began playing a subtle game, one that would slowly reveal how much they underestimated me. I started documenting everything: conversations, small gestures, the ways they tried to control me. I took notes in my diary with meticulous detail: every slight, every lie, every dismissive tone. I was building a record, not for legal action, not for anyone else, but for myself. To remind me that my power didn't come from yelling or fighting, it came from awareness and patience. Over the next few weeks, things escalated quietly. Jessica tried hiding my chair, moving it to the guest room when I wasn't looking. Each time, I noticed immediately. I'd return it to its rightful place without confrontation, like a ghost that refuses to be ignored. They would mutter under their breath, leave passive-aggressive notes, or leave the house without saying a word, but I stayed silent, calm, observing. I let their frustration simmer. Let them think they were in control. The real turning point came one evening when Michael invited a few of his friends over for drinks. They were loud, careless, completely ignoring me as I sat in my chair, knitting quietly. One of them, a young man with a smug smile, plopped down in my chair. "This one? It's kind of old," he said, leaning back like he owned the place. I felt something simmer in my chest, a mixture of fury and anticipation. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply smiled. "Oh, you want to try it?" I asked softly, almost teasing. "Go ahead. See if it still works for you." He leaned back with confidence and then, with a sharp creak, the leg of the chair gave way. He toppled backward onto the carpet with a startled yelp. Everyone froze. Jessica gasped. Michael's face turned white. I helped him up, voice calm, eyes steady. "Some things," I said gently, "aren't meant for everyone. This chair has history. It carries me, not just the weight of my body." The silence that followed was almost sacred. They didn't say another word about the chair for days. I felt a thrill of quiet satisfaction, a subtle victory that needed no loud confrontation. It wasn't about hurting them, it was about asserting myself in the only way they would truly notice. As the weeks went on, I realized that reclaiming the chair had changed me. I wasn't just sitting in a piece of furniture, I was sitting in my own strength. I began noticing the subtle ways I had allowed people to walk over me for decades. I remembered every slight, every dismissal, every time my voice was ignored. And I understood something crucial: revenge isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it's about showing up, reclaiming what's yours, and letting others stew in their own inability to take it from you again. By the end of the month, Jessica and Michael had stopped trying to manipulate me with the chair. They avoided the subject, spoke around it, and, in some quiet way, acknowledged that I wasn't the same quiet woman who once smiled and nodded at everything. I had become a force they could neither predict nor control, and sitting there, in the fading sunlight that filtered through the frost-covered window, I felt a deep, steady satisfaction. The chair wasn't just a chair anymore. It was a symbol. A symbol that age, experience, and quiet resilience could not be stolen. And that symbol would carry me through whatever came next, whatever subtle, cruel attempts they might make to diminish me. I had won the first battle, but the war was only beginning. Weeks passed, and the house began to feel different. Not because anyone changed, but because I had. I could sense their frustration, simmering just below the surface, and it gave me a kind of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in decades. It was subtle, quiet, but it was mine. Every glance they shot me, every sigh, every passive-aggressive note, they were all proof that my reclamation of a single chair had shifted the balance. Then came the night that I realized the full extent of the change, not just in me, but in them. It was a Friday evening, cold and windy, the kind of night where the city streets glisten under streetlights as if they were lined with liquid silver. I was sitting in my chair, a blanket draped over my knees, sipping tea and watching the lights flicker across the room. Jessica was bustling around, complaining about the noise outside, and Michael was glued to the TV, pretending he didn't hear her. I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you want and exactly how to get it. I had been planning for weeks, not out of malice, but out of necessity. They had tried to erase me, to dictate what I needed, and I had no intention of letting that slide. It started small. I began leaving subtle reminders of my presence everywhere. Photos of my younger self on the shelves, letters I had written but never sent, small personal artifacts placed where they would notice them. A scarf on the back of a chair. A cup on the counter. Notes tucked into books. Nothing obvious, nothing confrontational, but enough to make them pause, enough to make them remember that I had a life, a past, and a history that they could not erase. Jessica noticed first. "Mom," she said one morning, her voice tight with barely concealed irritation, "why are there things everywhere?" I smiled sweetly, letting the warmth in my voice mask the fire in my chest. "Things?" I asked, as if I had no idea what she meant. "Oh, you mean my memories? I think they belong here. Don't you?" She huffed, rolling her eyes, clearly unsure how to respond. Michael didn't even look up. But I knew he noticed. Oh, he noticed. The real moment came during dinner one evening. I had prepared my famous roast, the one everyone pretends they don't like but secretly loves. As they fussed with plates and poured drinks, I casually mentioned an upcoming auction I had attended alone a few weeks prior. Jessica frowned. Michael froze mid-pour. "I got a few things I thought would be perfect for the house," I said, deliberately letting my voice float through the room, including a little surprise for the living room. They exchanged glances, tension rising like storm clouds gathering. Jessica tried to mask her curiosity, but the way she leaned forward betrayed her. Michael, ever the peacemaker, muttered something about the auction being just a small event, but I could see the unease in his eyes when they weren't looking. I had been secretly placing small, meaningful items around the house, old photographs, delicate figurines, and even a few letters from friends long forgotten. Each item had a story, a memory, a piece of me that no one could take away. And with each new addition, the house began to feel alive again, not just a space I occupied, but a space I owned in every sense of the word. Then came the subtle, ultimate move. I invited a few neighbors over for tea, a casual gathering that appeared innocent enough. They arrived, chatting and laughing, and naturally, their eyes fell on the living room, the chair, my chair, perfectly placed, surrounded by little remnants of my life. I watched their reactions carefully. Jessica's jaw tightened. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. I smiled warmly at everyone, my voice light and airy, but every word carried a quiet authority. I thought it was time to reclaim a few things, I said, letting my eyes linger on Jessica and Michael just a little longer than necessary. Sometimes, people try to take what isn't theirs. But that doesn't mean it's gone forever. The tension was palpable, thick like fog in the room. They couldn't respond without making themselves look weak, and I could see it. I had planted seeds of doubt, unease, and guilt, and they were sprouting, quietly, invisibly but undeniably. Later that night, as I sat in my chair alone, the house quiet once more, I allowed myself a small, private smile. I realized something profound: revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be violent or cruel. The best revenge is subtle, elegant, and undeniable. It's about showing up, existing, and refusing to be erased. And in that moment, I understood the true power of that chair. It wasn't about wood or fabric, it was about presence, about memory, about demanding to be seen and acknowledged. I leaned back, feeling the familiar contours of the chair against me, and whispered softly, "I am still here. I have always been here. And you will remember that." That night, sleep came easy, filled with dreams not of fear or frustration, but of quiet triumph. The chair, my chair, was more than furniture, it was a throne. And for the first time in decades, I felt like the queen of my own life, unstoppable, unshakable, and unignored. It was a Friday afternoon when the moment finally came, the culmination of weeks of quiet observation, subtle maneuvers, and careful patience. The house was warmer than usual, the sunlight streaming through the windows in golden streaks that caught the dust in the air like tiny floating stars. I sat in my chair, hands folded over the familiar worn arms, sipping tea as I always did, and I listened. Jessica and Michael had come home earlier than expected. Their footsteps were sharp, hurried, betraying frustration and impatience. I smiled faintly to myself. They were walking straight into the trap I had laid so delicately. "Mom," Jessica began, her voice clipped and tight, "we need to talk about." I raised a finger, interrupting her, letting my smile stretch just enough to unsettle her. "Oh, I think the talking has been done, don't you? For weeks, I've been silent, and yet, I've been heard more clearly than ever." Michael shifted uncomfortably beside her, glancing at the chair as if it were a living thing, and perhaps it was. That chair held more than fabric and wood, it held decades of my life, of memories, of quiet endurance. It had become a symbol, and they knew it. "You can't keep doing this," Jessica said finally, her tone cracking slightly. "It's ridiculous. You're making everything so difficult." I leaned back, eyes locked on hers. "Difficult?" I echoed. "Jessica, I'm not making anything difficult. I'm living. I'm taking up space. I'm showing you that a person's life, my life, cannot be erased with a shrug or a new piece of furniture." Her jaw tightened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Michael finally muttered, "It's just a chair, Mom," though his voice lacked conviction. He knew, even if he wouldn't admit it, that this was no longer about a chair. I let the silence stretch, thick and deliberate. And then I reached slowly for a small envelope I had placed on the arm of the chair. I handed it to Jessica without a word. What is this?" she asked, her eyes wide as she hesitated to touch it. I smiled softly, leaning back into the contours of my chair. "A reminder," I said simply, "of everything I've given, everything I've endured, and everything I will not let be taken from me again." She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were letters, photographs, and small mementos from my life, things she had either overlooked or ignored entirely. Each item told a story, each letter a testament to my patience, my endurance, and my quiet strength. Jessica's face paled. Michael's hand shook as he held a photograph of the two of us from decades ago, long before their entitlement had taken root. Their silence was deafening, but I let it be. No words were necessary. They had finally been reminded who I was and that I was no longer someone to be dismissed. I took a slow sip of tea, savoring the warmth, and let my gaze sweep the room. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every artifact now stood as a testament to my presence. I realized then that this was more than revenge. This was a reclamation of self. I had been underestimated, overlooked, and disregarded for too long. But not anymore. Later that evening, after they had retreated to their rooms, silence settling over the house like a soft blanket, I sat in my chair and reflected. I realized that my victory wasn't about humiliation or payback. It was about power, the power to exist fully, unapologetically, and to remind others that I had a voice, that I had history, and that I would not be erased. I thought back to the moment they first took the chair, smiling smugly, thinking it was a small act. How little they knew. How every creak of the chair, every fabric tear, every curve of the worn arms had been my shield, my armor. And how now, sitting here, I felt invincible, not because they had been humbled, but because I had claimed myself. That night, I didn't just sleep. I rested in triumph, in quiet dignity, in the unshakable knowledge that I was seen, that I was heard, and that I mattered. And in the golden light of the living room, the chair held me in its arms as it always had, a silent witness to my story, my survival, and my triumph. I learned something vital through this journey. Some battles aren't won with anger or force. Some victories are quieter, subtler, but infinitely more powerful. They are won with patience, with dignity, and with the courage to reclaim what is yours, no matter how small or overlooked it may seem. And so, I sit here now, in my chair, at 72 years old, finally unshakable, finally acknowledged, and finally free. The chair was just the beginning. I am not just a chair, a memory, or a quiet voice in the background. I am Evelyn Harper. And I am unstoppable.